So just to briefly move on to our next speaker then, is Miss Katherine O'Leary. So we're very delighted to have Katherine with us today. Katherine is the mother of 4 adult children, 2 of whom have a disability. So while we had many professionals speaking today about how the system should work or that we think it works, it's great to hear from a parent in reality of what's happening on the ground and to hear from her perspective the importance of collaborative work, but also about keeping families informed along the way. Katherine and her husband Tim are dairy farmers in Cork. She's got a degree in facilitating inclusion from UCD, and she was a member of the steering committee who advised the government and produced policy for transforming lives, which underpins really the collective effort nationally to fundamentally reform how we deliver services for people with disabilities. So I welcome Katherine on board now to recount her personal experience of support services and the benefits of clear and timely communication between services and families.
Okay, good morning everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah, I have a black screen in front of me, Drew. What's that about? Okay. Well, I'm down here in Cork, and as you know, the way we're working at the moment with all this COVID is all very, very different. And I would dearly love to be in front of you where I would get a sense of all your faces and so on. But just so that's the way we are, and that's the way we find ourselves. The title of our work today, I'm a Child First. And even, you know, we can ignore the collaboratively working to support children. I think that is the key for me. I mean, I am 61 at this point, and I have the 4 adult children, as the introduction said, and so on. And I have dealt with many therapists and consultants over the years. I've dealt with 30 consultants to date over 5 or 6 teams. And I can tell you the ones that spoke to my child first. And out of 35, there was one. There was one consultant that zoned in on my child, or one therapist, one whatever, zoned in on my child and said, well, how is this little boy today and what's happening and so on. And I think I'm starting with that because I think it is the most important thing. We want to put the child must be first. So whenever you meet a child, you lead with the child. The parent is secondary. And I know that might be difficult to embrace, but I think it's very important. We're trying to manage our clicker here. Can you move those on, Drew? Oh yeah, okay, there you go. Sorry now. So just very briefly, I'm going to go through my personal story just to kind of tell you where I'm coming from. In 1982, Tim and I were married, and in 1985, Julie was born. At 29 weeks, I went into spontaneous labor and she was born. Now, imagine it is 35 years ago, so therefore things were quite different then. But at 18 months, Julie was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And you would wonder how a mother and a father and grandparents and so on, she was the first grandchild, did not see what was coming, you know. And I look back and I have photographs of Julie as she crossed the floor in our living room with her legs crossed behind her, dragging them. And I did not see that there was something wrong with my child. And again, this is when parents come to you or are referred to you with a child, you know, they can be absolutely blind. And I'm sure you're wondering, how could they not know how severe this disability is or whatever. So anyway, in 98, Julie was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and sure, it was a whammy. I mean, I was asking, will she walk, and when will she walk, and all this kind of thing. The day she was diagnosed, I was on my own. I had to go home and tell my husband. That was absolutely horrific. So, you know, the level of emotion, I think, that is involved when there is something wrong with your child, I think can get lost in the system, because that never goes away. That feeling of, and unfortunately, oftentimes mothers feel huge guilt. We don't talk about it much, but you will always wonder, what did I do? Where did we go wrong? What happened? You know, and from guilt often comes blame, and very often you're looking for somebody to blame. I quit full-time work. Luckily, farming was very good at that time, and we were able to afford for me to quit work and stay at home with my children. In 1988, 3 years later, my son Diarmuid was born with Down syndrome and a big package of medical difficulties. He was born without his bladder. He had an enlarged kidney, one kidney missing, a hole in his heart. You know, he was a very, very sick little boy. But I think we've always had a very positive attitude. And I remember my husband saying, you know, when he heard all this list of stuff that was wrong with him, I remember the one thing he said was, my son is going to live. You know, so you do positivity as parents, you need to get on with it. Then in 1989, Philip was born, and you would wonder why in the name of God Philip was born in 1989, having already had 2 children with disabilities. And I can tell you, we were all over the place. It didn't even occur to me that I could get pregnant, you know. And this is, I think, the impact of disability on a family. Parents are not able to think, really, and in hindsight, it's absolutely wonderful that we weren't able to think, because when Philip was born, it sort of restored normality to our household, in that we would have been a family that was completely tied up with disability, and here we had this normal child in the middle of it. And then a bit of more carelessness. In 1991, Colin was born, which gave us 4 absolutely wonderful children. Find the clicker. Can you move it, Drew, because it's not going on moving? Yeah, okay. I don't know why it's not working here. So there in front of you, you have my 4 children. Julie on the left, she is whatever she is there, 8 or 9 with cerebral palsy. The newborn Colin, Philip, and then Diarmuid on the right. And so at that time, I had 3 babies in nappies. But, you know, we were extremely happy as a little family. All my children were at home. We were getting on with life, even though it had many, many difficulties. Okay. I'm really sorry about this. It was just not moving for me. Like all people, I think it's important that we remember that children with disabilities have a right to be heard, have a right to be listened to, have a right to be asked, have a right to dignity, a right to privacy and confidentiality, a right to an education, and a right to access health services. I think it's important that we remember the rights that the children have that come to us. They are defined in law by the UN Convention, and I'm sure the people that are listening to this morning, all of you know policy. And our government policy, I believe that the disability policy we have in Ireland at this point is actually excellent. From all the different ones, I'm not going to name them. I think we have excellent policy. Okay, we haven't got them all implemented, but we have actually the blueprint that we need. Okay, next slide. So let's just talk about, you see the word pupils in there, the teacher is coming out in me. Working with pupils with special needs and working with children and families with special needs, it is not easy. You know this, it is not easy. Yet it is exciting, it's challenging, and it's hugely rewarding when you get it right. What level of disability a pupil has, or a child has, it does not define what that child will achieve. And I think it's important to dwell on this for a moment, because sometimes you look at the child and you look at the level of disability and you wonder, what is the future for this child, or and what supports does this child need? And I think sometimes we're looking too much into the future. We need to just dwell on what the child needs right now, what the family need in terms of backup, and live in the now, and encourage parents and families to live in the now. And I think this is how we got to where we are as a family. Very soon I learned to live in the now, because if I didn't, I'd be still crying. And this is the important thing. Your other parts of your life must go on. And as therapists and as social workers, you can actually lead parents in that direction and say, continue the rest of your life, make sure you're involved in lots of things and so on. And I know caregiving is difficult and does demand a lot of time, but if the other parts of your life aren't going on, you actually won't cope. But if you look at, I haven't enough time to tell you all about Diarmuid and Julie and my gang, but Diarmuid has gone from strength to strength over the years. He had a huge operation in when he was about 10, which made a bladder for him, and so on. And he went to UCC. Even though he has a moderate learning disability, he went to UCC, which was huge for him, and did the contemporary living course there for 3 years. He's a fine young man. He works on the farm. He can milk 100 cows on his own. Now, when I think of that little boy back then, and when he was running away, and when he couldn't be controlled, and when we thought, we'd crack up from trying to look after him and all his illnesses. And now I look at him as a young man who can milk 100 cows, who can go with me in the morning to school, get on the bus if it was normal times, and go to the service provider, Cope Foundation, 2 days a week, go and meet his friends, that sort of stuff. You could never imagine that type of a future for Diarmuid. Likewise, Julie, a young girl who she can walk using sticks, but most of the time she uses her wheelchair, and she's the most wonderful young woman, and she works for Inclusion Ireland. I'm sure many of you have come across her maybe in your work, but Julie she has a degree in psychology. She's an honours degree in psychology. She's a master's in journalism. She drives her own car. A number of years ago, she got married, and she and David have a little baby boy, which is huge joy for us. So, never think that you know what's going to happen in the future, because you don't. Government policy, as you know, is inclusion. And I think, remember that too when you're working with people. We have an inclusive policy. That means you're looking at a child that that child should be able to go to mainstream school, no matter what the disability. That is actually the ethos we have. And in time, maybe that will happen. It has happened in other countries. And so we come to how all this comes about, and that is communication. And we talk about collaborative working, and that cannot happen without communication. It is the oil of all the relationships that go on. So the challenges faced by parents, as social workers and as therapists, when people come to you, unfortunately, it's not just the child is coming to you, as you know, the whole family is coming to you. And very often there's a lot of baggage coming as well. I will always remember my first referral to a social worker, the first mention of a social worker to me. Oh my God, what did that mean? It meant I was a bad parent. And I think it's hard to get away from that. The reason you need a social worker is, you're doing something wrong, and that's quite difficult. So the challenges faced by parents are huge. You have multiple questions, and very often you have nobody to answer these questions. You see your medical consultant, you get maybe a diagnosis if you're lucky, or maybe you don't ever get a diagnosis, but you have all these questions, this why and where, and where's my child going to be, and what education is he going to have, and how are we going to cope, and will he ever work, will he ever have a life, and so on. But always remember that a parent is coming from a place of unconditional love, no matter what the disability is. That love is there, that feeling of wanting to do the best for your child. And you're going then to a therapist who you think will give you this leg up or this, and you think too that maybe getting this thing or this service will make things normal. And that's very difficult, but as you know, that's not going to happen. So you want to know, how will my child function? You're trying to make your child function as best as possible. Can my child go to school? And often these decisions are informed by the logistics of the family as to where they're living, what services they need, and all that. And you have families that may be isolated for all sorts of reasons. You, the professional, often become the confidant, and that's a difficult place to be in, but still, it's a huge part of your work. Okay. Next slide. So, what do you do with this trust that you get from families? You have to focus on communication. You have to focus on how you deal with them and how you communicate. And I think the most important thing is honesty. You be as honest as you can be. Always remember, yes, it's the child first. You're always talking to the child, always explaining to the child. Recognize that there is a huge partnership. There is a partnership between you and the family. There's also the partnership between all of the agencies that you work with and so on, in a different way as well for this family. So you are instigating, collaborating, supporting this partnership that allows this family and this child to progress, because that's what it's all about, this child progressing forward. Never remove hope. Even if you think there's no hope there, never remove the hope, because I can tell you there were so many times in my life that I thought there was no hope, and there was always hope. There was always a silver lining. Understand the limitation of families, and by that I mean, you may be asking a parent to do X or Y with the child or and so on, and it's not happening. And sometimes that's because they're not in the mental space. And I've often heard in staff rooms and so on, oh, so-and-so parent doesn't care. That is never true. That is never true. It is because of something else. Maybe the relationship has broken down. Maybe they're just totally snowed under, and maybe they don't have the money. And I know you are in your work, you're dealing with that all of the time. But sometimes parents find that really, really difficult to admit where they're at. So live the child-centered ethos as much as you can. Okay, next slide. Communication. I believe communication is where, if you think of all the things that happen with regard to services, if you break down all the things that Niall has said, every single thing comes back to communication. How you communicate, how you sustain the communication, and in terms of your records must be right, the people that you need to tell. I mean, the amount of times in my life that you might turn up for an appointment and, oh, sorry, it's at the wrong time, you made a mistake, who made the mistake, all these sorts of things are very, very difficult. Also, in your communication with people, even though a family or a person may drive you crazy, remember, once those words are out of your mouth, you can never take them back. So if you are cross or you say something that you wouldn't normally say, it ruins the relationship. It damages that relationship going forward. So you must always think before you speak. And I'm sure you're saying, oh, sure we'd always do that, but sometimes we don't as professionals. There have been times, and I haven't time to tell you stories now, but there have been times when I've said something in school to my pupils that I wouldn't say again. So you do learn as you go on. A good professional will develop good strategies, and you'll learn how to deal with parents, and how to speak to parents, and how to speak to the child. And I think in the rat race that we are in, and you are all immensely busy with huge caseloads, and this is the piece that often gets lost, because you're thinking, I have so-and-so's coming in 5 minutes, and then I have so many more clients, and so on, and there's so many I can't get to. So that you have to develop strategies about how you deal with all that. There is no doubt that individual professionals can drive success stories, and you can be one member of the team, but you are the one where the buck stops. So, while you're thinking, oh, I'm going to get somebody else to do that, you should possibly rethink that and say, well, how can I activate it, or how can I do it myself? Because you, the individual, can change the life for that child. An exceptional professional preserves the dignity of each individual he or she works with. Next slide. Be a team player. We go back one. Oh yeah. Be a team player. So encourage children and parents to take one day at a time. Definitely live in the present and take one day at a time. And there is help and support out there. And there is help and support out there from the other people you meet, other parents, and so on. And it's important to point families in the right direction. Always focus on the positive. There's always a positive. And remember that individuals do make a difference. And a disability is not the end of the world, but the beginning of a new world. And if you look at it like that, you will help an awful lot of families. Okay. So we look at this photograph here. I'm just about to finish now, but I'm just going to show you a few photographs. There's Diarmuid. And he's what, 32 now, and there he is reading the lesson at his sister's wedding. This is 4 years ago now, and there's Julie following it. And I love this photograph because it shows how much work has gone into both of them. And you have Julie, and really they've done it themselves. You see Julie there, she's going through the reading. She has coached Diarmuid to read the reading, and he read it word perfect, even though he has Down syndrome and a lot of difficulties with speech. So we'll move again. Next slide. And this slide I want to finish with, because this is the continuation of our family. This is Ricky Helen, who is Julie's son, my only grandchild. I hope I will have more, but this is my only grandchild, Ricky. And they live with us because they need the support for a while, and they will live in their own home eventually. But for now, they live with us. And this little fellow has brightened up our lives so much. It's absolutely unimaginable, the amount of love that's there and the amount of celebration. But if I take you right back then 35 years ago, well, maybe 32 years ago, to when I was in front of a consultant when they were assessing Julie's cerebral palsy, and she's spastic diplegia and so on. And he said, do not put too much into this child. Go away and have other children. So, that was a professional, he is deceased, speaking to me. And I know it's a long time ago, but you then look to the legacy, the woman that she has made of herself in spite of her disability, and now this beautiful little boy that will continue their legacy and our legacy. I think that's quite amazing. So some parents will always expect a miracle. And this, I think, for you, this is not your fault. Sometimes the inner turmoil has to come out. You will be bombarded with, whatever. And there probably is nobody in their lives to hear the thing that they're worried about. So you must learn to get beyond that. And please don't blame the system. We know there's an awful lot wrong with the system. And I think when a parent is dealing with you and you're dealing with a child, the last thing you need to hear is that, oh, the resources are this or that or the other, and that's difficult for you too. But it is important to remember when dealing with families. So to bring it all back, we bring it back to the child first. Always deal with the child and speak to the child. And there is huge hope out there. Okay, there are questions. Sometimes it's difficult to assist parents around difficult situations. How have you found in your experience, can professionals navigate positively around these situations? I think they can always navigate around difficult situations. Your biggest asset is to be able to listen, to be really able to listen constructively and try and break down their issues. Sometimes you don't have the answers, but I think just that listening to them and said, well, now, okay, what can we do for today? And today is where you can help your son or your daughter to do X and Y and get on with the therapy. I think that is the only way you can do it. You won't always have the answers, but I think if you feel you're listened to, and even though the answers mightn't be immediate, I think you will be happy. A mother of an autistic boy, thank you so much for your input. I absolutely agree with every word you said about being positive and living in the present. I'm so happy for you and your beautiful family. Well, thank you very much. That's really nice. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you for present. As a social worker and mother and grandmother to children with mild disabilities, I'd be interested to know what supports you feel are required for siblings with no disabilities of children with disabilities. Oh my God. There are serious supports required, I think. And it probably is around groups, their own sibling groups. And I know some of those exist. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. I was going to cough, and you can't cough in this climate. I think that siblings with no disabilities do suffer. And I remember one incident when Colin went to school, and he was only a small fella, he was only about 6, and there was a little boy with Down syndrome in the class. And he came home in the floods of tears. He says, Mom, you won't believe what happened to me today. The teacher put me sitting with the fella that has Down syndrome, and now I have it in school and at home as well, So, I mean, it can be quite difficult. But I think they do need support to get their heads around it. I don't know who should provide that support, but I think if we have an inclusive policy in school, more and more children with disabilities are going to school, and I think probably it's in the education setting that they can be helped. How can parents be shown an open door when they look for services? Oh dear. They just have to be shown an open door. Obviously it's about resources. Obviously it's about time and having enough therapists. And obviously we need to take on a lot more therapists to do that. And I am sure it's probably the social worker that has to show this open door. I know it's hugely difficult. I don't know. I haven't got a full answer now for that. I just know that open door has to be there for parents and families. Is that it? That's the last question. Okay. So I hope it's difficult to gauge when you're doing a webinar like this. It's difficult to gauge the response or how if you're saying the right things or whatever, if you're being of any help. I just hope that going forward that this matters, that the child is at the center. I mean, we talk about child-centered, person-centered. The child must be at the center of it. It must be the child first. And I think you therapists, social workers across the board, and all the MDT team, mind the jargon as well. I remember hearing for the first time, we're referring you to the MDT team. Oh dear, what is the MDT team? Oh, the social worker, this, that, and the other. We do tend to use way too much jargon in our work. So just mind that when you're at it. Working collaboratively, it is the only way to go, because that way you have a team, you have a backup, and you're not in your isolated bubble, and your colleague, another colleague, can be of immense help to you. Okay, so bye for now.